Here's the way to approach dealing with the steamroller. This comes from one of Greg's first books, Tactics. And the very first thing you do is just go, hold on one second. I'm not quite finished. And that will stop people 95% of the time. Just stop them. I have a coworker who does it, and they get excited with it, and they ask the question, and then you start to answer, and they want to talk over you. Oh, hold on, I'm just not quite finished. Most of the time, people will stop. If they don't stop, then you have to go to step 2, which is shame them. You have to say, look, you asked a question, or you made a remark. I was trying to answer you, and you talked over me. And if we're going to have a respectful conversation, we've got to allow each other to go back and forth. Is that fair? Make the point and ask the question so that you get buy-in from them. Yeah, I know, I get excited, I'm sorry, I get passionate about this. Well, passion doesn't justify being disrespectful, does it? I might ask that. So you're shaming them a little bit. You've tried to stop them, be polite. They've continued to do it another couple times, and now you're saying, look, you're not letting me get a word in, and I think that's a little disrespectful. Can we have a back and forth? Or what Shelley said is, do you really want to have a conversation? Do you want my input? Or do you just want to talk? Because I can just listen. I'll just listen to you, say what you want to say, but do you want to have a conversation? So you're shaming them a little bit. And if they keep it up, step 3 is to just leave them. Just say, okay, you know what? I find this to be not a healthy conversation. I keep trying to answer, and you're not open to hearing me. And I think I'm just feeling that uncomfortable, a little disrespected. And why don't you have the last word, and then we can just move on. That's how I would approach it. Questions on that? I hate playing atheist jerk. But
you do it so well.
wow, I don't know how to take that.
Should you stick a track in his pocket before you leave?
Stick a track in his pocket. Say, read this. I'll be praying for you. Okay, anything else on morality? Or else we're going to move forward. All right, so again, back to this here. We've spent a fair amount of time over here. Once you understand where somebody's coming from in terms of their worldview, by the way, if you see a sticker on my back, Adeline put that there. So just so I get to put the sticker on her back, she wanted to put it on my back. So we've asked some questions. We know where people are at, right? What do you think happens when we die? Where do you think the start of the universe came about? You've asked some questions, and you can put them somewhere on this line. And we've talked about, if they're here, to try to get them to be a little bit uncomfortable with that position. So now let's say they're more in this range over here. They believe in something spiritual, or let's say they believe in God, not necessarily Christianity. Somebody might say this, and actually this is probably maybe still a little more the atheist, but it could be, I believe in something spiritual, but not Christianity. And they say there's no evidence Jesus ever existed. It's a myth. There's lots of stories out there around ancient sages. Some existed and some did not. And from what I've read, I don't think Jesus ever existed.
I was going to say, what'd you read?
Yeah. Excellent. Because again, we're going back, we're starting with questions. The inclination, and I know I have felt it a lot of times, is to jump to an answer. But who has the burden of proof? I made the remark. I made the statement, Jesus is a myth. So I bear the burden of proof to give you my reasons why. Ask them. What have you read? Why do you think that? Yeah. Yes, a good one. That's a great. So how did you come to that?
It must be true, right?
Yeah, it's on the internet. It's got to be true. So we started with this one. How'd you come to that conclusion? It's all over the internet. Do you always trust the internet? You can make a little bit of a joke about it, right? And again, you want to have a friendly conversation. Greg Koukl has a rule. If anybody gets mad in the conversation, we lose. We lose. We do not want somebody getting mad. Now, we might not be able to help that because they just might be like an angry atheist. But we want to conduct ourselves in a way that doesn't have a confrontation in an angry situation. But here's the interesting. Does it strike you as strange that the entire world operates on a calendar based on the birth of a man who never existed? That's kind of interesting. Yeah. Right? Isn't that kind of strange? You think he didn't exist, well, why are we all kind of following that? Well, who knows? I will hear this a lot from skeptics. When they don't know, they'll just kind of shrug. Who knows? What started the universe? Who knows? Why is it the calendar based on Jesus' birth? Who knows? They'll shrug it off. I might just revisit the point, but isn't it interesting? Isn't it possible then Jesus existed if the calendar is kind of based around that? Don't let them just shrug it off. Go back to the point and just kind of, and then I would leave it alone. I wouldn't badger them, but that's like putting a rock in their shoe. That will stick with them. Here's an interesting point. Would it surprise you to know that virtually no academic in the world specializing in the time of Christ, so these are scholars of New Testament studies, even skeptics, not one of them believes Jesus is a myth. Not one. Take the most famous one is Bart Ehrman, who was a Christian. He left Christianity because of the problem of evil, but he scolded atheists on this point. He said, if you say Jesus is a myth, you sound silly. I think he said stupid, but you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Don't go there. Because there's lots of historical sources that Jesus existed, including non-Christian, right? There are over a dozen sources outside the Bible that reference Jesus. So this is where I would go with people. You could have a little bit of, this is a light one to go with, and then I would hit them here. Now, if you throw this out and they say, well, give me an example of one of these sources. I think it's interesting. Hold on. ChristianPoints.com, right? So here's in my website, if you went to ChristianPoints.com and you clicked on where the evidence for Jesus' death, this down here, I make one point that his death is reported in at least 10 non-Christian sources. So I give you Tacitus, considered one of the greatest Roman historians. You've got the Jewish Talmud. You've got Lucian Samosata, 2nd century Greek satirist. You've got these non-Christian sources that would reference Jesus. So now you're giving them something to think about. So you say, you know what, now he's not a myth. Have you ever read the Gospels and given him a chance? And I would encourage you to do so. So you've answered their thing, and now you're just inviting them. Just read the Gospels. See what you think. Make sense? Thoughts, questions before we go to the next one? Good? All right. Jesus never said, I am God. Christians worship him like that. I've read the Bible. He never says, I am God. This could be a Muslim saying this. This could be somebody from an Eastern religion. If you look at Buddhism, they believe Jesus existed, was a good teacher. Look at Hinduism. They believe he's one of the many deities, but he never said, I am God in the Bible. How would you answer this? I think what we're going to get into, I think, next week is the Trinity. And that is the biggest difference. Because sometimes Jehovah's Witnesses will call themselves Christians, as will Mormons, etc. If you go to the Trinity, they do not believe in the Trinity. So I'm going to give you next week a couple of very clear ideas, points to make to them, even using their text. Because if you look at their text in John 1, what does their text say? In the beginning was the Word, and In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. It's changed, is that verse. But verse 3 is not. And verse 3 is the trump to that. So we'll talk about that more a little bit next week. That's a good point. What would we say to this? Jesus never said, I am God. Snide. You are too nice to be snide, Carol. It didn't come across that way at all. All right, here's a couple things we could say. Where did Jesus ever say, I am God? You're right, Jesus never used those words, but is that the only way Jesus could claim to be God? I'm asking that because just because he doesn't say those specific words, does that mean Jesus didn't claim to be God? I want clarification on that. So you'd have to, if you're being a reasonable person, say, well, no, I guess you could do other things. That's right. And he did do other things. He says some specific things. He claimed, I am. In John 8:58, he took God's name. He accepted worship. There's a variety of things we can point to, but I want to get them off of this. Because they're basically saying, unless you said that, he didn't claim to be God. No, he claimed to be God in a variety of other ways. So that's where I would go with that question. How else would he do it? Well, one of Jesus' closest followers claimed Jesus created everything that has ever been created. Again, we will go to this next week because this is where I would go with Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and others. Where is that? Oh, that's in John 3. What if Jesus never said, worship me, but he readily received worship from others and never told people to stop? So he's not saying, worship me, but people naturally worshiped him, and he didn't say, oh, don't do that. Isn't that implicitly accepting worship and saying it's okay to worship me? Do you know why Jesus was executed? He claimed to be God. So these are a variety of things that you could say to respond to that point. And we'll do more next week when I flush this one out a little bit more.